it out, you'll see it's a through and through brush, so it's got brushes at either end. We've got some cleaning adapters that attach to your scope. This allows us to push fluid into your scope and clean your scope. We've got a cleaning adapter valve. This goes in place of your blue air and water button. And this really helps combat clogging. It pushes air and water through your scope at a high rate to try to remove anything that might be in your distal tip. From when you're maneuvering the scope, actually let's talk about that. So the tip of the scope, it's got a lot going on in the distal tip of the scope. We've got, of course, the very large instrument channel that we need to clean. We've got two glass pieces, that's two light emissions. If you're ever in a procedure and you think it's dark, or you don't think you're getting good illumination, with the light on, it should be blinding if you look at it. If it's not blinding, something is going on. But you've got two light emissions, then you've got one really large glass piece, that's where your camera chip is, that's what gives you your video signal. And then that silver piece is what this button helps, that's where your air and your water come out. So when you're maneuvering your distal tip, you can get mucosal tissue in, or you can get foreign material in that silver piece. So we want to make sure that that gets removed, and that's what this button is for. Last but not least, the last piece is our very friendly leak tester. This is what tests your scope to make sure that there's no compromises in your scope. Compromises can come from external things, internally from instruments going through your scope, and we want to make sure we test that scope before you submerge it. Because if it doesn't pass that test, we don't want to submerge the scope, because additional damage can happen, fluid intrusion. So we want to make sure that we do that. And then the only thing that you need to supply is a nice big 60 ml syringe. So what I want to do is, after we've gotten done with our procedure, I know you've already done it, but we want to make sure and engage all of those functions of the scope. Our air, our water, and our suction are all working. So I'm going to test that. I've got bubbles coming out. I'm going to test fluid. Fluid is coming out. Then suction. If it's just an upper, I'm going to do 5 to 7 seconds worth. If it's our colonoscopy, I'm going to err on the longer side. Probably around 10 seconds. We're just kind of taking a look at what's coming out of the scope. And typically if it's coming out dirty, I'm going to probably go till it's coming out cleaner. I also like to pulse it at the end just to make sure there's anything that's kind of staying put in that channel. It's going to help maneuver it out. I'm going to turn off that air for a second, and now I'm going to institute that cleaning adapter button. I take off that blue air and water button, and I just put this one in its place. Then I certainly want a bowl or a towel nearby, because when I turn on the air, this valve automatically pushes air and water through that silver portion. Again, it's trying to push any foreign material out. I just don't want it to accumulate a bunch of fluid and or debris just out, so I want it to collect in a bowl. This button does have 2 levels, so I just let it roll on its own for around 5 seconds, and then I will push that button. Good. So as you can see, it's still pushing fluid out, so what I'll do is I'll just release pressure with that button. Then the next thing we want to do is we want to do our leak test. And to do that, we need to disconnect our video pigtail. So I'm just going to pull your video pigtail out, and we need to close that video housing of the scope. And that's what this cap does. Now, the scope should be airtight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our leak tester, and it only goes on to this silver piece here one way. Now the leak tester, we want to push air into the scope so it's in that blue range. I like to go to the 200 mark every time. And per the manual, it says in a 3 to 5 minute time span, it shouldn't fall more than 10 millimeters of mercury. But while that is going on, I am going to deflect my scope 3 times each deflection. I'm going to do the large wheel, 1, 2, 3. The reason why I'm doing that is I've been in the field many times and we've leak tested, and it holds perfectly fine with it straight. The minute we do our deflection, it can open up that hole that otherwise would have held if it was straight. You can see the rubber of the bending rubber crinkles and moves. And again, that can open something from the outside or the vertebrae on the inside. It can open up a hole. So it's very important that you do that just to make sure. And the leak test is moved one notch. Now, I will always get I'll get a call from a newer customer saying, Chris, our scope went 12 millimeters of mercury. What do I do? And the first thing I say is, did it stop? It's important that it stops. If it stops, I feel much better. But there is something that you can do, one final thing that you can do, and it's called a wet test. You would submerge the working length of your scope, and we would deflect our scope.
Look for bubbles.
And we're looking for bubbles. Of course, we want to make sure that our scope is pressurized. If I don't see any bubbles, I am very confident and feel good on moving on. If we see bubbles, we would just want to wet down our scope and give your rep a call and let them know that for sure our scope has failed the leak test. What's my next step? So our scope has held, which is great. Now we can completely dismantle the scope, and yes, everything can be submerged now. You can, we do recommend to have just like Rubbermaid tubs, really fine. If you look around the room, you see the silver cases that your scope comes in. I always say just get a Rubbermaid tub that's roughly that size. We also do sell cleaning basins as well, so that's another option as well. So, I'm going to release that pressure on the scope. I'm going to take the suction tubing off, dismantle the water bottle. And now my entire scope, as I said, can be submerged now. I'm going to take off the buttons. The adapter can be set aside. My suction button and my instrument channel can come off. So I always inspect the suction button. A lot of good debris can sit on the bottom there. Just nice toothbrush style bristles. And same thing with the suction. The instrument channel cap, because if you think about it, your instruments are going in, it's kind of being squeegeed off as it comes out, so you can find some good debris on the bottom there. Just make sure that that's nice and clean. Put that in the enzymatic cleaner. I'm going to work the outside or the working length of the scope to make sure we're removing any foreign material. The distal tip, I just like to make sure to get anything off the distal tip. Another thing too, if you're doing a procedure and it really gets mucked up on the distal tip, lay on the fluid button while you put your thumb over the tip. Fluid will be coming out while you can wipe off that distal tip. It'll get rid of whatever is on the distal tip and you can go back in. So what we want to do now is we want to add fluid to our scope. So we're going to work with these adapters. They are size specific. So these are going to work on the buttons. The solo one goes on your instrument channel. For this, it doesn't matter which one you start with. I'm going to suction up enzymatic cleaner. Question. And I'm going to plunge the one side while I close this side. If I don't close this side, the fluid's just going to come out there, but we want the fluid to go through the scope and out the other orifices of the scope. So do each one twice. One thing that I didn't mention. So, of course, this is an enzymatic and distilled bath. I like laser with that one. So, typically when I do my in-service, I'll email the clinic a couple options for enzymatic cleaners. Get them through really any of your distributors. There's one that's really popular, and it comes in packets. And each packet makes a gallon of distilled water. Again, we want to use distilled water with our scope as well as our water bottle. Because as wonderful as the scopes are getting smaller, so are those channels and everything in the scope. So we just want to try to avoid any minerals or deposits that can accumulate in your scopes. It's just will keep them functioning better, less clogging, all that good stuff. Again, there's enzymatic and distilled water in this tub. This is just the brand that I carry here. You can follow the directions on the enzymatic cleaner as how you do the mixing. It's usually like a pump per gallon, but all the directions are on your enzymatic cleaner. Alright, so I'm going to move to the second one. So I'm going to flush and hold that side one more time. Next, I'm going to use the cleaning brush, take off these adapters. And our cleaning brushes have kind of changed over the years. They are now supposed to be single use. They are through and through brushes. We used to have them where it was just a brush on one side and a ring on the other side. So I find that through and through are much easier to use. I also think it's better to go all the way through with your brush. Back in the day, I'll never forget one of the reps when I first started. I rode with somebody. They put the brush in, and right in the middle, he got to talking, forgot if he was going out or coming in, and he decided to reverse it. Came out, and there were no bristles left on the brush. They were all now on the inside of that scope. So I think the through and through it's a better thought process, at least in my mind. It goes all the way through the scope. We're basically going to work with the same ports that we just worked with. Again, it doesn't matter what order you go in or where you start. I just always have the habit of going with the instrument channel first. And it's going to go basically through the working length out the distal tip. And And just like the flushing, I'm going to do each spot twice. And when the brush comes out, just kind of take a look. If it's dirty, obviously I would clean it off before I go back in with it. The next spot, there is nowhere for the brush really to go in the air and water. Just kind of take a look in there. Next, there are actually going to be 2 spots in the suction. So first one is straight. It's going to clean the head and then continue out the distal tip. Straight. The next one is going to be on the side, or I should say on the wall on the inside, aiming towards the umbilical cord. I was just telling David, I'm having much more trouble seeing things close up now that I just turned 49. I can still see on the side there, so I'm just going to aim it on the side of the wall. Going to go down the umbilical cord, and now it's going to come out the suction port there. And at the end, it does have to make kind of a 90-degree angle, so you're going to get a little bit of resistance. You can see that's a little bit dirtier than it was going in. Stop. And one more time. There, push through. Then we would have a second bin ready with just our distilled bath, and we're going to repeat that process that we just did. Cleaning adapters on, flushing distilled through the scope, again each one twice. Then we would want to run our brush through each spot twice just to make sure the scope is clean. Once we've done that, then it is recommended that the scope is hung without the buttons in it. If you put the buttons in, it creates a seal, and then gravity can't pull that fluid out. And as you can see too, the scope does hang nicely. One thing that I wish Storz did sell is a cabinet. I really do recommend that you house it somewhere. Our carts, not the carts in here, but the carts that we sell, for the most part, will have a scope holder. That is more for procedural or getting ready for the procedure. But to house it or to keep it safe, really do recommend either somewhere in your clinic that is low traffic, not going to be walked by and then the draft, pouring it out. So cabinets are nice if you do just like a Google search of flexible endoscope cabinet. Tons will come up. So just try to find something in your price range that you feel can house it. You just want it to be able to hang like I was just showing you. You can put your instruments in there. That leads me to your instruments. Of course, we do sell a mix of reusable and disposable. Of course, the disposable, especially biopsies, you really should use it once. You're doing multiple biopsies per site. They go fast. Instrument-wise, like snares and things like that, can certainly be used more than once if you want. And certainly want to check them, kind of like I was doing with the brush, make sure there are no kinks in your instruments. Always open and close before and after your procedure to make sure the instrument is working properly. If not, discard it and use the next one. Reusable that are mainly metal. If it's the jaws that are metal, put in a little bit of instrument oil on them, making sure that they work well for instrument belt will work fine too. Knowing how your instruments work and feel. Todd will show you one of the two prongs, just knowing how it actually grasps and knowing your instruments is important too. Sterilization of the scope. Our scopes can be ETO gas sterilized. Not every clinic sterilizes the scope. If you want to make sure something is dead and gone, again, you can gas sterilize. You also can do a cold sterile, which would be like a Sidex or a high glutaraldehyde content solution. And that's usually like a 15-minute soak. And then you would just do your sterile wash or a wash to take off that fluid.